hello everybody and welcome to Fashion And with me, Scott Schiavone, Fashion Curator. In this episode, we're going to be looking through the fashion lens at a style of dance that emerged from the house ballroom scene of New York City and especially Harlem in the late 20th century. The theme of this episode is fashion and voguing. Taking its name from the high fashion magazine Vogue, voguing was a highly stylized modern house dance that originated in the late 1980s but had its roots in the Harlem drag ball scene of the 1960s. It gained mainstream exposure when it was featured in Madonna's 1990 smash hit song and video Vogue, and was showcased in Jenny Livingston's 1990 documentary Paris is Burning. Today, in its modern form, voguing has become a global phenomenon that has communities all over the world and continues to evolve stylistically. This episode will look specifically at the 1980s and 90s Black and Latino LGBTQ+ communities of the house ballroom scene, voguing and its relationship to fashion, as well as its influence and lasting legacy. Therefore, we will explore fashion and voguing through 5 themes: the house ballroom scene, fashion, the ball and voguing, Paris is Burning, the mainstream and Madonna, and the ballroom legacy. But before we get started, I would like to ask for your support. As a gay man, I would like to highlight some organisations that focus on supporting Black and Brown LGBTQAI+ people. I've included links to these organisations in the description where you can access more information and support through donating money or time. Now, I understand that COVID-19 has hit some of us hard, and if you can't donate, there are still many ways to contribute, including streaming playlists, where the ad money goes towards charities supporting Black and Brown people. Links to these playlists are also in the video description. Thank you, and let's get back to the episode. Though it rose to prominence in the mid-1980s, New York's house ballroom culture can be traced right back to the mid-19th century. Harlem's Hamilton Lodge staged its first ever queer masquerade ball in 1869. 20 years later, a medical student stumbled across another ball in Walhalla Hall on the Lower East Side, where he witnessed 500 same-sex male and female couples waltzing sedately to the music of a good band. At the beginning of the 20th century, a distinctly black LGBTQ+ culture took shape in Harlem and was particularly influential in further establishing the ball culture. Describing them as spectacles in colour, Harlem Renaissance activist and writer Langston Hughes said drag balls were the strangest and gaudiest of all of Harlem's spectacles in the 1920s. In the 1960s, as the balls steadily gathered momentum, racial tensions both in ball culture and America as a whole erupted. Black queens were expected to whiten up their faces if they wanted a chance of winning any contests. Crystal LaBeija accused organisers of the 1967 Miss All-America Camp Beauty pageant of racism and rigging the vote. LaBeija rightfully declared, "I have a right to show my colour, darling," her passionate displeasure of the situation immortalised in the movie The Queen. This incident prompted Crystal LaBeija to begin holding her own black ballroom events, establishing the House of LaBeija and the house culture. Referencing the high fashion design houses whose glamour and style they admired, other black drag queens started to follow suit, forming drag houses with children, headed by a mother and sometimes a father. Children were normally Black and Latino LGBTQ+ youths, shunned by their own communities and kicked out by their own families. Children would compete in categories, being judged, normally out of a score of 10, on their realness and ability to pass in the straight world. Tens across the board, darling. By the 1980s, house names included the House of LaBeija, of course, the House of Saint Laurent, the House of Ninja, and the House of Extravaganza. These balls became a blend of fashion show and performance and were highly charged with creative artistry and competitive energy. At one ball in 1953, Ebony magazine reported that more than 3,000 contestants and spectators gathered in Haarlem's Rockland Palace to watch the men who liked to dress in women's clothing parading before judges in the world's most unusual fashions. In the 1960s, fashion shows in the US and Europe began to feature music in their productions, and photographic models began walking in fashion shows, striking poses as if for the camera. Back at the ball in the 1960s, the dominant look was the Las Vegas showgirl, complete with rhinestones and feathers. Throughout the 70s and 80s, styles changed from emulating movie stars to supermodels and high fashion magazines. More butch queens, defined as a gay man who is neither extremely masculine nor extremely feminine, that's me, butch queen realness, started to participate, sometimes as men and sometimes in drag, leading to an increase in the categories and their complexity. By the early 90s, typical categories for balls included sudden change, haute couture evening wear. Once you open your cape hiding your one-of-a-kind show-stopping gown, the ballroom will never be the same. Accessories a must. And European runway models effect. Big boys with an ova, meaning fabulous umbrella, tall boys in a sickening ova flowing skirt, midgets in a black top hat. Labels are not a must. Other categories included schoolboy realness, town and country, executive realness, high fashion Parisian, butch queen first time in drags at a ball, military realness, high fashion evening wear, and banjie. Realness was everything. This was not satire. The aim was to strive to create the perfect illusion, to be able to blend and pass as your straight counterpart. The role fashion played in the balls cannot be overemphasised. Evident in many house names which deified high-end and couture designers such as the House of Saint Laurent or the House of Lanvin, the children from legendary houses admired these elite designers and imitated styles from their runway shows. Authentic designer labels worn at balls were normally acquired through mopping, which basically means thieving. Temporary purchase, you know, when you buy it, wear it to the ball and then return it the next day. Don't look at me like that, we've all done it. And very occasionally, outright purchase. Many of the children designed and sold their own clothes, and houses normally had a designer, either from another house or those with house ballroom scene connections. The clothing made by designers in the balls, although inspired by the runways of Paris, more often than not had a twist incorporated into the design. The format of a ball strongly resembled that of a fashion show. The obvious use of a runway, the wearing of fashionable clothes, the blaring of music, and don't forget those judges. One of the most interesting connections between the balls and fashion involves the evolution of voguing. Named after the famous fashion magazine, voguing took the poses from high fashion and ancient Egyptian art, adding exaggerated hand gestures to tell a story. Growing out of the drag queen ritual of throwing shade, voguing as an art form is inextricably linked with ideas of fashion, luxury, and social mobility. Its dramatic hand and leg movements were based on elements of classical ballet, jazz, and modern dance. DJ David DePino, a legend of the ballroom scene, said, "It all started at an after-hours club. Paris Dupree was there and a bunch of black drag queens were throwing shade at each other. Paris had a Vogue magazine in her bag, and while she was dancing, she took it out, opened it up to a page where a model was posing, and then stopped in that pose on the beat. Then she turned to the next page and stopped in a new pose, again on the beat. Then another queen came up and did another pose in front of Paris, and then Paris went in front of her and did another pose. This was all shade. They were all trying to make a prettier pose than each other, and it soon caught on at the balls. At first they called it posing, and then, because it started from Vogue magazine, they called it voguing." Another account of its origins is that it was first practiced by black gay inmates of Rikers Island, a New York City jail, as a way of attracting the attention of other boys and throwing shade. Voguing, inextricably linked to the balls, evolved into a highly stylised dance form and created new voguing categories for the children to participate in. Voguing was also used to peacefully settle disputes among rival houses. Voguers would use the dance to read each other, and ultimately the winner would be the person who threw the best shade. The 1990 documentary Paris is Burning first put a spotlight on Harlem's ballroom culture and the Black and Latino LGBTQ+ people who frequented it. This iconic film by Jenny Livingston, named after the 1986 ball staged by Paris Dupree and the House of Dupree, was a portrait of New York's house ballroom scene. Filmed between 1986 and 1989, the documentary provided a rich cultural insight into the culture of Black and Latino drag balls and the challenges the participants faced with regards to race, class, gender and sexuality. The documentary explored ball culture and explained the unique language of the scene, defining the meaning of terms such as house, shade, reading and of course categories. Paris is Burning included interviews with legendary mothers Pepe La Beja, Doreen Corey, Angie Extravaganza and legendary father Willie Ninja. It also featured the young and beautiful Venus Extravaganza, who hoped that one day she may live as a spoiled rich white girl living in the suburbs. Femme queens like Venus would typically try to distance themselves from the idea of drag, since they aimed to pass as a woman. The irony was that the life she longed for was an emulation of the society that had shunned her. Venus Extravaganza was tragically found dead, strangled in a New York hotel room, her body stuffed under a bed. Although it is widely celebrated as an invaluable piece of documentary history on Black and Latino LGBTQ+ communities, the film remains controversial. The people portrayed in the film were working class, poor and/or sex working, and some were even battling homelessness and HIV and AIDS. None of the cast received any money for the documentary and went on to sue Livingston. Pepe La Beja actually declared her approval, saying, "I love the movie, it brought me international fame. That was one of my dreams, doing the drags in the first place." For many, the years following the release of Paris is Burning were anticlimactic, but some went on to have notable success, including Willie Ninja, who travelled the world working with models such as Iman and Naomi Campbell, and modelling and choreographing runway shows for Chanel, Thierry Mugler, Karl Lagerfeld and Jean-Paul Gaultier. In 2006, a follow-up film entitled How Do I Look?, co-directed by Kevin Ultra Omni from the House of Omni, was released and aimed to, as Omni put it, iron out some of the discrepancies of Paris is Burning. The breakthrough into the mainstream came in 1989 when Voguers, including Willie Ninja, started to walk the runways of Thierry Mugler's Autumn-Winter 1989 collection in Paris. Then for the design industry's Foundation for AIDS Love Ball event held at the Roseland Ballroom in New York City on May 10, 1989. Organised by legendary club promoter Suzanne Barsh, Voguers took to the runways. The New York Times reporting, "The evening had all the elements that make New York City nightlife remarkable: beauty, pageantry, celebrity and gender confusion. Leading figures from the fashion industry were on hand to sponsor, perform and judge in perhaps the biggest public display to date of voguing, a campy, stylised version of runway modelling that has flourished for decades in Harlem and more recently in downtown nightclubs." Malcolm McLaren's 1989 track Deep in Vogue and its iconic video once again showcased the talents of Willie Ninja, father of the House of Ninja. However, it was the one and only Madonna that turned voguing into a global phenomenon. Strike a pose. In 1989, when voguing at the recently opened Sound Factory nightclub in New York, Jose Gutierrez Extravaganza and Luis Camacho, both members of the House of Extravaganza, were introduced to Madonna by their mutual friend Debbie Mazar. Jose recalls, "Debbie took me over to meet her. We talked for a while and then she asked me and Luis to vogue for her on the spot. So we did. She loved it. She said she was doing this video that she wanted us to be in, and maybe a tour as well, so invited us to the auditions. Then she asked us to choreograph the video and teach her how to vogue." Released in March 1990, Vogue went to the top of the charts in 30 countries and became the biggest selling single of the year. Madonna received criticism from members of the community for appropriating their culture for her own gain. Jose Extravaganza dismissed those claims, saying, "She didn't go to some Ivy League dance department and try to recreate voguing. She came to the club herself and sought us out. What people seem to forget is the good that came from this great pop gay icon taking voguing and putting it into the world stage. She didn't steal it, she came to the club and found two of the community's own, myself and Lewis, and took us with her. That was her way of honouring it and giving it credit and keeping it what voguing traditionally is. After Madonna's Vogue, mainstream interest in voguing died down, leaving the community to pick up the pieces. Today, fashion, art and music seem to be increasingly influenced by ballroom culture rather than the other way round. Non-binary contemporary fashion designer William Dill Russell, whose sharply tailored clothes can increasingly be found in the pages of high-end fashion magazines, says, "I'm inspired by queer history, particularly the balls of the 1960s, 70s, 80s and 90s, because of the people who participated in them. They were trailblazers for our community. They were totally unapologetic about who they wanted to be." The New York House Ballroom scene is the subject of Ryan Murphy's award-winning Pose series. Set in 1987, the series is breaking boundaries with its cast of transgender leads and supporting cast of hundreds of LGBTQ+ extras. Pose is unflinching in its depiction of the dark side of the scene. Two of the lead characters are HIV positive, while one mourns the death of his lover from AIDS. Jose Gutierrez Extravaganza, who plays a ballroom judge on the show, said, "I think it's an important show because people have forgotten how bad it was back then. With the internet and social media, we live in a fake world with people only posting what they want us to see. So I think it's important to show how bad things were for the generation of 20 or 25 years ago." It must also be mentioned that the series has some amazing costumes, recreating the glamour and opulence of the legendary fashions worn at the balls of the 80s and 90s. My favourite is the opening sequence where the legendary House of Abundance steals clothes from a museum to walk in the ball as the Royal House of Abundance. Amazing! And I don't condone stealing clothes from museums, it's very bad. To celebrate Pride Month, King of the Paris voguing scene Kiddy Smile went to the Vogue Paris offices to break the dance down for film director Loic Préjean and explain why it's still so relevant today. Kiddy Smile was surrounded by dancers from the legendary houses of La Durée, Gucci, Revlon and Ninja. There is also the HBO Max voguing reality competition television series Legendary, which explores the world of ball culture and follows mainly Black and Latino LGBTQAI+ house members, predominantly from 8 houses, as they navigate through 9 balls with a whopping $100,000 prize fund for the winning house. So what are you waiting for? Strike a pose, there's nothing to it, Vogue. The relationship between fashion and voguing cannot be overemphasised. The house names, categories and dance itself found its main source of inspiration in the designs of elite designers and the pages of high fashion magazines. Voguing as an art form is inextricably linked with ideas of fashion, luxury and social mobility. Voguing and its associated fashions provided a platform for Black and Latino LGBTQ+ people to express themselves and emulate their desired lifestyles made unattainable by a world that cruelly shunned them. Whether it was Paris Dupree who took out a Vogue magazine and mimicked the poses to the beat of the music, or the black gay prison inmates at Rikers Island performing for the attention of other men, voguing is continually being developed further as an established dance form that is practiced in the Black and Latino gay ballroom scene and clubs in major cities throughout the world, including New York and Paris. Well, that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the legendary world of voguing and New York's house ballroom scene. Episodes 1 to 6 of Fashion and are also available to watch now. We all have an individual responsibility to amplify black voices by clicking the links in the video descriptions to help support and donate to charities and organisations supporting black LGBTQAI+ people. Please comment, like and share, and please remember to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing from Fashion and with me, Scott Schiavone, Fashion Curator.